of the discussion of, making connections through communication. Now, there are the three chapters, they are 4, 5, and 6. One is regarding verbal communication, one is about nonverbal communication, and one is about listening and thinking in regards to the communication process. So, first of all, in regards to verbal communication, when we think of verbal communication, we probably think about what they refer to in the book as language. So just for the sake of consistency, I'm just going to just continue to refer to this as verbal communication. And of course, verbal communication, I guess the easiest way to think of that is just to think of it as the words that we use to express some thoughts that we have. And basically, this is an important part of the big picture because without verbal communication, it would be difficult for us to have ways to create and share a meaning with each other. It would be more difficult for us to have power in our communication. And it would therefore be that much more difficult for us to make connections with each other. And I guess finally, it would make that a little bit more difficult for us to influence our perceptions of others. And so basically, I guess this goes in tandem with what was mentioned in the following chapter, chapter 5, entitled Connecting Through Nonverbal Communication. Now, nonverbal communication is kind of interesting. Again, this is one of those things that we often take for granted because it's just so natural that we don't even think about it. And so the thing that this book says to differentiate nonverbal communication from verbal communication is that nonverbal communication includes all of the behaviors and all kinds of symbols that we do not automatically express through words. It's without the words. It's everything except the words. Everything in communication except the words are nonverbal communication tools. And the thing that stands out about nonverbal communication is, for one thing, it occurs constantly. Like I said, it is very natural. It's even more natural than the words because, of course, it's just like when we were born. We were not born saying actual recognizable words that are recognizable to a lot of people. They were only recognizable to us. We were born with mostly nonverbal communication. We use the nonverbal communication to eventually learn how to use verbal communication. So it's very instinctual. It's very dependent on context. So, for example, if a person bangs their fist on a table when they're trying to emphasize a very strong point during a lecture, that meaning can be received very differently from the way it would be received if a person banged their fist on a table when they had a frown on their face and after they had just lost an argument. So, of course, it's very dependent on the surrounding situation and background. Another thing about nonverbal communication is in that it tends to be more believable than verbal communication. Good example might be with a family member, whether it's your spouse or your sibling or even cousin, you're more likely to take that person seriously, or at least in our American culture, you're more likely to take what they are saying in words seriously if they are looking you in the eye, at least uh, part of the time when they're talking to you. So that's another example of how it is a little bit more believable than just mere verbal communication. And like I said, it is a primary means of expression that kind of goes along with how instinctual it is. In fact, when you think about it, you realize that if there had not been any nonverbal things to for words to symbolize, then there would be nothing to there would be no use for verbal communication. There would be no reason to create actual words. Another thing that kind of goes in tandem with what I said earlier about how it's very dependent on context. It's also very dependent on culture. Culture can sometimes be that context. Uh, and it just so turns out that in some cultures, if you are younger than the person you're talking to, and you look them in the eye for more than a second at a time, then you might be mis, misunderstood as being defiant rather than just being attentive. Then you're more expected to hold your head down and avoid eye contact with an older person in order to be attentive, but at the same time show respect in that culture. Having been in Korea for the better part of a decade, I actually saw that quite a bit. So those were the things that really stood out regarding verbal and nonverbal communication. Obviously, they complement each other. And now, in chapter 6, they entitle it Connecting Listening and Thinking in the Communication Process. And then this is where the verbal parts and the nonverbal parts can kind of work in tandem. They can be pulled together as pieces of a puzzle. Now, that is because, for example, with listening is a result of, well, it's actually something that can only happen if someone is hearing. Hearing is strictly physical. Listening is a combination of the physical hearing with your ears, with your physical ears, and thinking and perceiving what you hear with your mind. So it's both physical and mental. Now, listening, in some parts of the book, it talks about how good ways to listen are in manners in which you listen not only with your ears and your mind, but also with your ears and your eyes, and if possible, with your nose, your sense of smell. So it basically implied that the more senses you use simultaneously to aid your listening, your active listening, when you're listening and trying to get something out of what you're hearing, the more of those you use simultaneously to aid in that, the more effective your listening will be, the more information you'll be able to retain as well. There were some other things that were brought up in this chapter. A few things in particular that they pointed out were that when you're listening, you want to focus on the speaker rather than focusing on well, not focus on the speaker, but actually focus on the message rather than on the speaker. For example, they're saying that if a speaker is wearing a color that you don't like, and you have this habit of looking at what the person is wearing rather than paying attention to what they're saying, And I mean that is another way to be easily distracted and therefore struggle with listening that much more. And it really gets specific with a list here that talks about the habits that can contribute to effective listening. Number one, if you find areas of interest in what you're trying to listen to and keep an open mind, then you can get that much more out of what you're trying to listen to. And this might be a lot very, very obvious for a lot of you. Obviously, if there's no interest in it, then you're that much less likely to pay attention in the first place, or even that much less likely to even be present and to hear something. Concentrating on the content of the presentation. And now that kind of goes back to what I was saying about concentrating not on things that are outside of the message, but the actual verbal content of the message. Now, at the same time, I said you should use more than just hearing when trying to listen. If you look at the speaker's relevant facial expression or gestures, then that can also help to aid your concentration on what that speaker is actually trying to convey. Of course, listening for main ideas is another very important thing. Just like when you were taught reading comprehension, you were taught to start by finding out what the main idea of the reading content was. The same thing applies with listening. Rather than trying to start with details, you start out with the big picture, find out what the main idea is, what the main supporting ideas are as well, rather than the minor details. Now, let's see. Preparation is something else that it points out. It's easier to listen to a lecture, any kind of lecture, if you're prepared, I mean, mentally prepared to go in there. If you know why you're going there and why it's important for you to listen to what this person is saying, then it's easier for you to get something out of what you're listening to. For example, when I was in church earlier today, I was kind of tired, but I mean, before I went there, I read a little bit of what I anticipated would be in the sermon, and it helped me to retain the main ideas of what the sermon was designed to convey. And resist distractions. And this might seem kind of redundant, but it's very important. The more you concentrate on having this mental picture, of what the speaker is trying to express, then it's easier then to concentrate. And of course, that goes along with paying attention, which is the last thing that the book points out. And it talks about critical thinking, and that goes along with active listening. And things that help out with the critical thinking are note taking, and again, not starting out with the details, but starting your notes with the main ideas. And then that way, as soon as the lecture is over, you can go back, and while the content is still fresh in your mind, you can fill in the details when you have a little bit more time to write it down. And when they talk about critical thinking, they're talking about breaking it down, the content that you're hearing. And so number one, just trying to get the main idea, literally the main idea of what you heard. and then trying to be able to put that in layman's terms, so that you can put it into context, and most of all, apply it to your own life. And that's, I guess, where the interest aspect of this all comes in. Being able to know and understand what this content has to do with you. And that's probably the biggest thing to take away from all of this. Now, communication. Like we said before, it's a very multifaceted fact of life. We do it all the time, but there's more to it than we notice sometimes. Of course, some people say there are folks who speak in code. It doesn't do any good to listen to just what they say. You have to listen to what they mean. So, I mean, whether something is nonverbal or verbal, even if someone is saying something in words, and it's easier to understand what they're saying if you take into account both the verbal and nonverbal aspects of what they're saying. So I hope that that kind of gets my point across, and I look forward to hearing what you all have to say as well. Thank you very much.